The council chamber was bigger than anything Zaxthor had ever seen in his life, and the ceiling disappeared into clouds that flickered with lightning every few minutes. He walked slowly across the black polished floor, and his aide Vixnall pointed toward the inner circle where the most important species sat. The founding species had their seats close to the center, and Zaxthor counted them one by one, until his eyes stopped at one particular chair. It looked strange because while every other seat showed signs of use and age, this one looked clean and untouched. A thin layer of dust covered the armrests and the nameplate read, Terra in letters that still gleamed. "Why is that seat empty?" Zaxthor asked his aide, and Vixnall's skin changed color in a way that showed fear. "No one talks about it, sir, and it is considered rude to ask questions about it." Zaxthor wanted to know more, but the session was starting, and High Chancellor Mordek called everyone to order. The session went on with normal business about trade and mining rights, but Zaxthor could not stop looking at that empty chair. During the break, he walked up to Senator Kelsina, who was known to be friendly with new members. "The Earth seat," Zaxthor said without any greeting, and Kelsina's face darkened immediately. "You are new here, Representative, and some questions should not be asked." "But there must be records," Zaxthor pressed on and asked if humans went extinct or were thrown out. "Neither," Kelsina said quietly and looked around to make sure no one was listening. They left by their own choice, and the council decided to keep their seat waiting. "Waiting for what?" Zaxthor asked. "For them to come back," Kelsina whispered, and her voice was shaking. "Pray to your gods, Representative, that they never do." She walked away quickly and left Zaxthor standing alone in front of the empty chair. That night he went to his quarters and started searching the council archives. Most files about Earth were locked at the highest security levels, but he found small pieces here and there, references to something called the separation and notes about sealed military records. One phrase appeared again and again in the oldest documents, and it said, "By their mercy alone." He found one file that was not locked, and it was a speech from the founding ceremony. A human named Commander Jake Morrison had spoken, and the words were short but heavy. "We helped build this council to make sure the strong protect the weak and that justice wins over tyranny, and that no species suffers like we once did. We take our seat today with hope but understand this clearly. We will not stay if that hope proves false. Our absence will be your warning and our return will be your reckoning." Zaxthor read those words 3 times and tried to understand what they meant. Humans had not just left the council. They had left a threat hanging over everyone like a sword. He started a deeper search into classified files, and within minutes his screen flashed red. High Chancellor Mordek himself appeared at his door less than an hour later. "Representative," the old Archon said, and his voice carried weight that came from living thousands of years. "There are some truths that the Council has deemed too dangerous for common knowledge, and the Earth matter is one of them. I must ask you to stop this investigation." "Why?" Zaxthor demanded and stood up to face the Chancellor. "What could be so terrible that we cannot even speak of it?" Mordek was quiet for a long time and then spoke slowly. "Because 12,000 years ago humanity discovered what we had done, and in their mercy they chose to simply walk away. But they made us promise to keep their seat ready and to remember what we are in their absence. Most species have forgotten what that empty chair means, and I pray every day that it stays that way." "What did we do?" Zaxthor asked. "That is precisely what you must not seek to learn," Mordek said heavily and left. But Zaxthor was young, and curiosity burned stronger than caution in his blood. 3 weeks later, an anonymous message arrived with coordinates to a place in the archives called Level 97. The message said the truth about Earth had been hidden in plain sight for 12,000 years. Zaxthor knew accessing that level was illegal and could get him expelled from the council or worse. But the empty seat called to him during every session, and he needed to understand. He waited until the night cycle when most representatives were sleeping and went to the archive entrance. The door was made of a metal he did not recognize, and his security pass should not have worked, but the door opened smoothly. Inside, the archive stretched into darkness and emergency lights came on as he walked. He followed the coordinates to a section marked Founding Era Classified Imperial. Imperial, Zaxthor said to himself with confusion. The council had no empire, and it was supposed to be a democracy. But as he opened the files, the truth started coming out like a nightmare. 12,000 years ago, the galaxy had been different. 6 of the founding species had not come together as equals. They had been part of something else called the Archon Dominion, and it had been a brutal empire that conquered a third of the galaxy. Humanity had been their target, and the file showed strategic plans for Earth, which was listed as primitive but rich in resources. The Archons had detected radio signals and sent a fleet to subjugate the planet. It was standard procedure for the Dominion, and they would arrive with overwhelming force and demand, surrender and enslave the population and strip the planet of everything valuable, and then move on to the next world. But something had gone wrong. Zaxthor found battle reports filed by Fleet Commander Zix Orin, and the Dominion fleet had arrived at the Sol system with 500 warships. They expected easy victory from the humans, who only had chemical rockets and had barely reached their own moon. The first message from Earth had been simple, and it said, "Leave our system." The Dominion fleet had laughed, and Zix Orin sent back an equally simple response that said, "Surrender or face extinction." The humans sent a second message, and it said, "You were warned." What happened next made no sense to Zaxthor. The human planet did not launch missiles or fighters. Human vessels appeared from nowhere, and they were ships that violated every known law of physics. They did not use normal weapons. Some Dominion ships just stopped working, and their systems went completely dead. Others tore apart from the inside as if gravity had reversed. Some ships vanished entirely and were erased so completely that even their debris stopped existing. The Dominion lost 473 ships in 17 minutes. The remaining 27 fled, and only 12 made it back to Dominion space. The others disappeared while traveling through space, and something hunted them across light years. Zix Orin's final report was short and terrifying. They were never primitive, and they were waiting and watching. "We attacked children who are pretending to be helpless, and they stopped pretending. Request immediate withdrawal from all territories within 500 light years of Sol. Further engagement will result in total species extinction, and this is not an exaggeration. I have seen what they can do, and we are insects compared to them." The Archon Dominion debated, ignoring the warning, and according to the files, that debate lasted 6 hours. It ended when Earth sent a single message to the Dominion homeworld, and it bypassed all encryption and security. The message contained coordinates to every Archon military base and supply depot, and colony world and command center, not just in Dominion space, but also secret bases the Archons thought were perfectly hidden. The message ended with simple words that said, "We know where everything is. Stand down or find out what else we know." The Dominion stood down immediately. 3 months later, representatives from Earth arrived at the Dominion capital, and they brought the other 5 founding species with them, who had all been conquered or enslaved by the Archons. Commander Jake Morrison delivered the terms personally, and Zaxthor found the recording deep in the classified files with a warning label that said, "Emergency access only for catastrophic threat protocols." He played the recording and saw a human male wearing a simple blue uniform with no weapons visible. His face looked calm and almost gentle, but his eyes held something that made Zaxthor feel cold even through a recording that was 12,000 years old. "You will dismantle your empire," Jake Morrison said in a voice that was quiet but firm. "Every slave will be freed, and every conquered world will be liberated. You will form a council with these 5 species as equals and not as subjects. You will create laws that protect the weak from the strong, and you will police yourselves fairly and justly. You will never attempt conquest again." An Archon voice that probably belonged to the Emperor asked what would happen if they refused. Jake Morrison smiled, and it was the saddest smile Zaxthor had ever seen. "Then we will do what we came to this galaxy to escape, and we will become the monsters we fled from. We will erase you, and not just your government or your military, but your entire species. Your worlds will be empty, and your history will be a warning. We have the capability, and we lack only the willingness. Do not give us the willingness." "You would commit genocide?" the Emperor asked, and his voice shook. "No," Morrison said quietly. "We would prevent a greater one. Your empire has killed trillions, and how many more will die if we let you continue? We have run the numbers, and we have seen the projections. In another 1,000 years, you will have conquered half the galaxy, and in 5,000 years, all of it. How many species will exist then, and how many will you have erased? We have already lived through that once, and we will not let it happen again, because we cannot." The recording ended, and Zaxthor sat in the darkness trying to process what he had heard. Humanity had not just defeated the Archon Dominion, they had forced the most powerful empire in the galaxy to destroy itself and form the Council. They had created the very system that Zaxthor now served. But the files continued, and he kept reading. The Council had been established, and the 6 species worked together with human advisors guiding them. For 17 years, humanity helped build the framework of galactic government and trained peacekeepers and established courts and laws. Then they discovered the camps and the files contained images that Zaxthor wished he could never unsee. On a world called Korvash, the Council's archaeological teams found evidence of the Archon Dominion's darkest secret. Before the conquest and before the Empire, the Archons had nearly been wiped out by a plague. They survived by harvesting genetic material from other species and experimenting on them and using them as living laboratories. The camps had held billions, and not warriors or criminals, but civilians and children. The Archons had processed entire species through those facilities and took what they needed and disposed of the rest. It had lasted for 3,000 years before the Dominion rose to power. The Council tried to hide the discovery, and not out of evil intent but out of fear. The Archons were one of the 7 founding species, and revealing their crimes would tear apart the fragile peace. But a human scientist named Lisa Grant found out, and she brought the evidence to Commander Morrison. Humanity called an emergency session, and Zaxthor found Morrison's final speech to the Council preserved in the files. "You lied to us," Morrison said, and his voice was heavy with disappointment. "We asked you why you built an empire, and you said it was natural expansion and the desire for resources and security. You never mentioned that your entire species exists because you committed atrocities that make our worst nightmares look tame. Now you want to bury it again and pretend it never happened." It was 3,000 years before the Dominion. An Archon delegate protested. "Our ancestors' sins are not ours to bear." "Then why hide them?" Morrison demanded. "If you have truly changed, then own what you were, memorialize the victims, and teach your children so they never repeat those horrors. But instead you want silence, and you want to move forward without accountability. That tells us you have not really changed at all, and you have just been scared into compliance." The Council voted to seal the records, and it was 6 species to 1. Humanity voted against sealing them. 3 days later, Commander Morrison gave one final address, and Zaxthor played that recording with hands that shook. "We came to this galaxy running from our own darkness," Morrison said. "We had fought wars that nearly destroyed us, and we had committed atrocities in the name of survival. We had looked into the abyss of what we could become and barely pulled ourselves back. We thought we could help you avoid our mistakes, but we were wrong. You are not trying to be better, and you are trying to hide what you are. We cannot be part of that, and we will not legitimize it with our presence. So we are leaving, and we are taking our seat, but we are not coming back unless you prove you have actually changed. Our seat will stay empty, and let it remind you what you chose when you chose comfortable lies over difficult truth. If you ever do what you did before, and if you ever restart the camps or the conquest or the horrors, then know this: we will be watching, and we are always watching. We will not show mercy a second time." Humanity left that day, and all of them departed together. Every human advisor and scientist and diplomat and observer boarded their ships and left Council space. The records showed they traveled beyond the galactic rim into the void between galaxies. Long-range sensors tracked them for a few months before losing contact entirely. For 12,000 years, the seat remained empty, and it stood as a reminder and a warning and a promise. Zaxthor closed the files and sat in silence for a long time. Now he understood why no one spoke of Earth. The Council existed only because humanity forced it into existence. The peace that everyone celebrated had been imposed at gunpoint by a species so powerful, they made the galaxy's greatest empire surrender without fighting. Somewhere out in the dark between galaxies, they were still watching. He returned to his quarters that night and could not sleep. The next morning, during the Council session, he stared at the empty seat and saw it differently now. It was not just an empty chair. It was a grave marker for ideals that had died. It was a warning that had been ignored for so long that most species thought it was just decoration. It was a promise that terrified him, because he now knew what humanity was capable of when pushed too far. High Chancellor Mordek noticed his staring and approached him after the session. "You found the archives," the old Archon said, and it was not a question. Zaxthor nodded slowly. "Now you understand why we do not speak of it. The truth is too heavy for most to bear, and the fear would paralyze the Council. Better to let it fade into legend and let the younger species think it is just a symbolic gesture. But it is not symbolic," Zaxthor said. "It is real, and they are still out there." Mordek's face showed an expression that might have been grief. "Yes, they are. And every day I wake up hoping they never find reason to return, because if they do, it means we have failed completely. The Council has slowly forgotten what we promised them, and we have slowly returned to our old ways." Not as openly and not as brutally, but the patterns are there. We hide it better now, but we are still what we always were. What happens when they notice? Zaxthor asked. Mordek looked at the empty seat with ancient eyes. Then we discover if mercy has limits, he said quietly and walked away. 6 months after discovering the truth, Zaxthor tried to focus on his normal duties, but he could not stop noticing things that others seemed to ignore. The council maintained its appearance of following the ideals humanity had forced upon it, but beneath the surface old patterns were returning. The Archons still controlled most of the military forces, and the Velkorans dominated trade through methods that looked suspiciously like the old monopolies. Conquest had been replaced with something called economic integration, but it achieved the same results. Worse than that, Zaxthor discovered through careful investigation that the Korvash camps had not been the only secret. Similar facilities had existed throughout the Old Dominion territory, and most had been destroyed after humanity's intervention, but several had simply been abandoned and sealed away. Not eliminated, but just hidden. Recently, some of them had been quietly reopened, and Zaxthor found reports that claimed they were for research purposes only. For security reasons and to understand historical biotechnology, in case such knowledge was needed again, brought his findings to High Chancellor Mordek. Expecting outrage, or at least concern, but the old Archon just looked tired. What did you expect, Representative? Mordek asked. We are what we are, and humanity tried to change us. For a time, fear kept us in line, but 12,000 years is a long time. Memories fade, and new generations arise who never witnessed humanity's power. The council continues, but the spirit behind it has been reinterpreted. This is exactly what Morrison warned against, Zaxthor said with anger in his voice. Morrison is long dead, Mordek replied, as is everyone else who met humanity, and they have become legends and myths. Many species do not even believe they were real, and think the founding species invented the story to justify the council's creation. The empty seat is seen as a symbol and not a genuine warning. You know better, Zaxthor said. I do, Mordek admitted. My line has passed down the true history, and I know what humanity did. But I am one Archon among billions, and what can I do except try to slow the inevitable decay? Close the camps, Zaxthor demanded. Honor what humanity wanted from us. And if I try, Mordek asked. If I reveal what is happening, then the political structure would collapse and wars would break out. Billions would die in the chaos, and sometimes representative evil must be tolerated to prevent greater evil. Zaxthor left that meeting understanding he was alone in this fight. The council knew it was betraying humanity's vision and simply did not care anymore. After 12,000 years, Earth's absence had changed from a presence to a void, and the threat had become background noise that was easy to ignore. He considered resigning and returning to his homeworld, but something kept him at his post. Someone needed to remember and someone needed to care. Then came the day the monitoring station went silent. The station called Outpost Prime sat at the edge of council space where the galactic rim began fading into the intergalactic void. It was officially a research facility studying dark matter and cosmic radiation, but unofficially Zaxthor learned it monitored for any sign of human activity. For 12,000 years it had detected nothing. Then it sent one burst transmission that said contact detected and analyzing, and unable to classify, and signature matches no known patterns. The transmission cut off mid-sentence. The council sent a fleet to investigate, and 12 ships heavily armed arrived at Outpost Prime to find it intact but completely empty. No crew and no bodies and no signs of struggle. Just empty corridors and functioning systems. On the command deck, they found a message written in 6 different languages, all belonging to the founding species. The message was simple, and it said, "We are still watching." The council tried to suppress the news, but rumors spread quickly. Then came the second incident when a Velkoran trade fleet vanished in the outer territories. Then an Archon research vessel disappeared. Then a pirate station that had been operating under unofficial council protection simply ceased to exist. All disappeared without distress calls and without evidence and without any explanation. At each location, the same message appeared on nearby stations or buoys, and it always said, "We are still watching." Panic began spreading through the council chambers, and the younger species who thought humanity was mythology suddenly faced the possibility that the legends were real. The older species who had let themselves forget now remembered what they had tried to bury. High Chancellor Mordek called an emergency session, and the chamber was packed with every species represented and every delegate demanding answers. Mordek stood at the central platform looking older than Zaxthor had ever seen him. 12,000 years ago, Mordek began, humanity left us with a warning. We were told to maintain the principles of the Council and to protect the weak, and to prevent the strong from returning to the old ways. We were told they would watch and they would know if we failed. You are saying humans are behind the disappearances, someone shouted from the crowd. I am saying we have been given a message and one we would be wise to heed, Mordek replied. This is terrorism, a Velcoran delegate declared. We should mobilize the fleet and find their base and eliminate the threat. The chamber erupted in argument, with some species wanting war and others wanting negotiation. Most simply wanted to understand what was happening. Zaxthor sat silent and watched the empty seat. In the chaos of the session, he could have sworn he saw something for just a moment. A flicker, as if someone had been sitting there watching and then vanished again. That night, Zaxthor received another anonymous message, and this one contained coordinates to a location in neutral space far from any council world. The note said, "Come alone and come unarmed. If you want truth, we will give it, but only to those brave enough to face it." Zaxthor knew it was likely a trap and knew he could disappear like the others. But he had spent months learning about humanity and understanding their history. He had come to a conclusion that they had been right and the Council had failed. It had betrayed everything it was meant to be. He chartered a small ship and set course for the coordinates. The journey took 3 days, and when he arrived at the designated location, his sensors detected nothing. Empty space with no stations and no vessels. He prepared to turn back, thinking it had been a hoax. Then his ship's computer spoke in a voice it had never used before, and it was smooth and undeniably human. "Hello, Representative Zaxthor," the voice said. "Thank you for coming, and we have been wanting to talk to someone who actually cares." "Who are you?" Zaxthor asked with his hearts racing. "We are the descendants of the people who left, and we are what humanity became when we stopped pretending to be less than we are. We are here to deliver a message the Council needs to hear." "What message?" Zaxthor asked. "That time is up," the voice said. "We gave you 12,000 years and we watched as we promised. We saw you slowly forget and slowly return to your old ways. We have been patient and we hoped you would remember. But you have reopened the camps and restarted the conquests under new names and forgotten why we left. So now we are coming back, and not as advisors and not as partners, but as judges. You are going to attack the Council?" Zaxthor asked, and felt fear grip him. "No," the voice said calmly. "We are going to do something worse, and we are going to give you exactly what you asked for 12,000 years ago. We are going to leave you alone and completely alone. We are going to show you what happens when there is no one watching, and when there is no one who cares about mercy or justice or protecting the weak. We are withdrawing our surveillance and we are pulling back our monitoring systems. We are leaving this galaxy to manage itself." "I do not understand," Zaxthor said. "You will," the voice replied. "Soon everyone will understand. See how long your council lasts when you truly believe no one is watching. See how long before the strong devour the weak. See how long before you become the Dominion again. When you do, and when you finally become the monsters you have been pretending you are not, then we will return. Not to judge you, because you will have already judged yourselves. We will return to contain you, and to make sure your darkness does not spread beyond this galaxy. Consider this your final warning and your last chance. You have 1 generation and prove us wrong." The voice fell silent, and Zaxthor's ship rebooted with all systems returning to normal. He sat in the cockpit shaking and understanding exactly what humanity had just done. They had not threatened war, but threatened abandonment. They had threatened to give the Council exactly what it had been slowly asking for, which was freedom from accountability. Freedom to be what it truly was. In that freedom, humanity knew the Council would destroy itself, and the only question was how long it would take. Zaxthor returned to Council space, and his report sparked the greatest debate in 12,000 years of history. For 6 weeks, the chamber became a battlefield of competing ideas and fears and ambitions. The galaxy species divided themselves into 3 groups almost immediately. The reformers, led by Zaxthor and other younger delegates, demanded immediate action to close the camps and end the exploitation, and return to genuine principles. "We have been given a warning," Zaxthor pleaded during one heated session. "They are testing us, and if we fail, we lose everything." The militants, commanded by Admiral Vexillar and supported by most Archon military leaders, saw opportunity instead of threat. "Humanity has shown their hand," Vexillar argued. "They are withdrawing and leaving us alone, and this is not a test but a retreat. They have grown weak or lost interest, and either way we should prepare for their return, not with compliance but with strength. Let them come back, and this time we will be ready. The Deniers were perhaps the most dangerous group, and they simply refused to believe any of it was real. "We are chasing ghosts," declared Senator Crix of the Velcoran Assembly. "There is no proof these disappearances are connected to humanity, and the message at Outpost Prime could have been a hoax. We are letting fear of a myth dictate our policy, and it is absurd. Humanity, if they ever existed, is gone and dead or irrelevant. We should focus on real problems." High Chancellor Mordek tried to maintain unity, but even his authority was fracturing. The Archons themselves divided with younger generations, questioning why their species should continue living under restrictions imposed by an absent threat. "We have been good for 12,000 years, one young Archon delegate declared. "How much longer must we prove ourselves to judges who are not even here?" The fracture grew deeper when the Velcoran Assembly announced it was reopening 3 research facilities in its territory, and these were former Dominion camps that had been sealed. In the interest of scientific progress and galactic security, they claimed. The vote passed despite reformer objections, and Zaxthor walked out in protest. That night the facilities were destroyed but not damaged or attacked. They were destroyed in a way that defied all explanation. Each facility, along with the 10-kilometer radius around it, simply ceased to exist. Perfect spherical voids appeared in 3 Velcoran worlds, and the edges of the spheres were so perfectly smooth they reflected light like mirrors. No radiation and no debris and no evidence of weapons. Just absence where matter had been. Floating at the center of each void was a message beacon broadcasting in every known language, and it said, "Last warning." The galaxy held its breath, and the militants demanded mobilization. The Deniers claimed it was some natural phenomenon being exploited by fearmongers. The reformers begged for immediate compliance with humanity's demands. The Council chose none of these paths, and instead, in a closed session that Zaxthor was not permitted to attend, the senior delegates made a decision. They would continue as they had been, but more carefully. The camps would remain closed officially, and economic exploitation would be disguised better. The appearance of compliance would be maintained, but the old ways would continue in shadow. It was a compromise, Mordek explained to Zaxthor later. "We cannot change what we are overnight, and the Council represents thousands of species and trillions of beings. You are asking for a transformation that would take generations, and we do not have that luxury. We do not have the luxury of halfway measures," Zaxthor countered. "Humanity is not asking for perfection, and they are asking for genuine effort. This compromise is worse than doing nothing because it is dishonest." "Then what would you have us do?" Mordek asked. "Fill the seat," Zaxthor said. "Stop waiting for them to come back and go to them instead. Send delegates and apologize and ask for help. Show them we actually want to change and that we are not just scared into temporary compliance." "And where would we send these delegates?" Mordek asked. "Humanity left the galaxy and we do not know where they went." "Then find them," Zaxthor insisted. "We have 12,000 years of monitoring data and long-range sensors. We could search." Mordek shook his head slowly. "The Council will never approve such a mission, and it would be seen as weakness, begging for mercy from an enemy." "They are not our enemy," Zaxthor said with frustration. "They never were, and they were our conscience. We need them back." But Mordek was right, and the Council refused to authorize any search. Instead, they fortified, and the militants got their wish. Fleet expansion was approved, with new shipyards constructed in every major system. Research into advanced weapons accelerated, and a new doctrine emerged called deterrence through strength. Zaxthor watched his galaxy prepare for war with a species that had already proven itself beyond their capability to fight. It was madness, but it was madness, born of pride and fear, which was a toxic combination that had destroyed civilizations throughout history. 3 months after the Velcoran facilities were destroyed, the first new Archon research installation opened in deep space. It was built hidden behind false readings and cloaking technology, borrowed from a dozen species. Only the highest-level delegates knew of its existence, and Zaxthor was not supposed to be one of them. But his anonymous benefactor, whoever they were, kept feeding him information. The installation's purpose was clear, and it was to reverse engineer human technology. The Council had recovered fragments from the ancient battle in Sol system, and these were pieces of human ships that had somehow survived. For 12,000 years these fragments had been studied in secret. Now, with humanity supposedly withdrawing, the Archons believed they could finally unlock the technology that made humans so powerful. Zaxthor realized then that the Council had learned nothing. They had not understood humanity's message at all, and they thought it was about power and weapons and technological superiority. They did not grasp that humanity's strength came from something else entirely, which was the willingness to sacrifice for principles and to walk away from power rather than abuse it. He made his decision that night, and if the council would not go to humanity, then he would. He filed for a leave of absence claiming personal reasons, and it was approved without question. His constant protests had made him unpopular anyway. He chartered a long-range explorer vessel, and it was the kind capable of extended travel into deep space. His aide, Vixenal, found him preparing the ship. "Sir, what are you doing?" Vixenal asked. "Leaving," Zaxthor said simply. "I am going to find them." "Find who?" Vixenal asked. "Humanity, and that is impossible. They could be anywhere in the intergalactic void, and you could search for 1,000 years and find nothing." "Then I will search for 1,000 years," Zaxthor replied. "Someone has to try, and someone has to show them we are not all lost." "You will die out there," Vixenal said. "Probably," Zaxthor admitted. "But I will die knowing I tried, and that is more than the council can say." Vixenal was silent for a long moment and then started loading supplies. "Then I'm coming with you, and someone needs to document your foolish death properly." Zaxthor smiled and said thank you. They departed 3 days later, and their ship headed beyond the galactic rim into the space between galaxies. Behind them, the council continued its preparations and built weapons and fortified borders, and convinced itself that strength could replace wisdom. The empty seat remained empty, but now it felt less like a promise and more like a grave marker. Something precious had been lost, and the galaxy had forgotten to mourn it properly. Zaxthor and Vixenal traveled for 3 years into the void between galaxies, and their ship strained against the vast emptiness. Supplies ran low, and life support systems began failing, but they followed that ancient signal deeper into the darkness than any council vessel had ever ventured. They were preparing for suspended animation, and accepting they might never wake when their sensors detected something impossible. Light and structure and civilization appeared where nothing should exist. Not a single world or station, but an entire cluster of artificial constructs orbiting what appeared to be a manufactured star hovering in the void. "Is that?" Vixenal could not finish the question. "Humanity," Zaxthor whispered. "It has to be." As they approached, their communication systems activated without their input, and a human voice speaking perfect Krellian filled the cockpit. "Welcome, Representative Zaxthor and Vixenal of the Krellian Empire, and we have been expecting you. Please dock at Platform 7 and you will need medical attention. We have much to discuss." The dock was inside one of the massive structures, and it was large enough to house a city. As Zaxthor and Vixenal emerged weak from their journey, they were met by a human woman with graying hair and kind eyes. She introduced herself as Dr. Claire Bennett, and said she was head of the External Relations Committee. "You came a long way," she said as medical staff helped the 2 Krellians to treatment facilities. "Though I admit we did not expect anyone to actually make the trip. When we detected your ship 3 years ago, there was quite a debate about whether to guide you here or redirect you home." "Why did you let us come?" Zaxthor asked. "Because you tried," Claire said simply. "That matters, and come. Once you are recovered, there is someone who wants to meet you." 2 days later, recovered and fed Zaxthor and Vixenal were brought to a garden, which was an impossible place of green plants and flowing water existing in a space where no garden should be. An old human man sat on a bench feeding what appeared to be birds, though Zaxthor had never seen any species quite like them. "Representative Zaxthor," the man said, and stood with effort. "I am Jake Morrison's great-great-great-grandson, and also named Jake. I have inherited his role as Speaker for Humanity. And please sit. We have much to discuss." "You are still alive," Vixenal stammered. "After 12,000 years. We age slowly here," Jake explained. "Time works differently when you are not bound to a single dimension. But yes, some of us who left are still alive, though most of the original generation has passed. I knew my grandfather only as a very old man, and he told me stories about Earth's time with the Council. I found the archives," Zaxthor said. "I learned what you did and what you tried to build and what we became instead." Jake nodded sadly and said, "We have been watching. We have seen the camps reopening and the old patterns re-emerging. We have seen the Council preparing for war with us and building weapons from children's toys and thinking they are matching our capabilities. It would be funny if it were not so tragic." "Then why did you withdraw surveillance?" Zaxthor demanded. "Why give us that message and you had to know how the Council would react?" "We gave you a test," Jake said. "Not of your ability to defeat us, but of your ability to defeat yourselves. We wanted to see if you could choose to be better without someone forcing you, and without the threat of our return keeping you in line. He paused and looked sad. You are failing that test, Representative, and failing it badly. I know, Zaxthor said. That is why I came in to ask for help. To beg if necessary, and to tell you that not everyone has forgotten. Some of us still believe in what you tried to build. Jake studied him for a long moment. Do you know why we really left? You found the camps and you discovered the council was hiding its past. That was the trigger, yes, but the reason goes deeper. Jake stood and gestured to the structures around them. This place and what we have built here is what humanity became when we stopped limiting ourselves. When we stopped pretending to be less than we are so others would not fear us. Out here away from the galaxy we have grown and we have transcended. We have become something the council could not understand. He turned back to Zaxthor. We did not leave because we were disappointed, Representative, and we left because we were dangerous. The longer we stayed, the more the council relied on us and you were becoming dependent, letting us solve your problems instead of learning to solve them yourselves. We realized we were creating the very thing we had fought against, which was a power structure, where the strong controlled the weak, even if our control was benevolent. So we left and we forced you to stand on your own. And now we are falling, Zaxthor said. Yes, Jake agreed, because you were never standing at all and you were kneeling and pretending it was the same thing. When we removed the threat, you simply chose a different master, which was your own worst natures. Then come back, Zaxthor pleaded. Force us to be better again. No, Jake said firmly. That is not the answer, and do you not see? If we return now, nothing will have changed and you will be good because you are afraid and not because you choose to be. The cycle will repeat and we will leave eventually and you will fall again. We cannot save you, Representative, and only you can save yourselves. But we are not strong enough, Vixnell said. The council will not listen and they are preparing for war and reopening camps and falling back into old patterns. What can 2 junior delegates do against that? What can one person do against the tide, Jake mused. My grandfather asked himself that question when he first saw what the Archon Dominion was. One human looking at an empire that had conquered 1/3 of the galaxy. And what could he possibly do? Jake smiled. He found others who cared and he built a coalition. He did not do it alone and neither will you. Change never comes from the powerful representative and it comes from the committed. You are not going to help us at all. Zaxthor felt despair settling in. I did not say that. Jake reached into his coat and pulled out a small data crystal. This contains something we have never shared with anyone and the truth about humanity, our real history and why we were running when we entered your galaxy 12,000 years ago. What we were fleeing from. It is a story the council has never heard, and a context that changes everything. Take it back and share it and let them understand what we were trying to prevent. Zaxthor took the crystal carefully. What will it show them? That we were not your saviors, Jake said quietly. We were survivors and we came to your galaxy after our own was destroyed. Destroyed by us and by what we became when we let power go unchecked and when we stopped caring about being better. We rebuilt ourselves and rewrote our entire culture around the principle of never letting that happen again. That is why we reacted so strongly to the Archon Dominion, and we were not looking at strangers. We were looking at ourselves 12,000 years earlier, and we could not let you make our mistakes. The empty seat was not a threat, Representative, and it was a memorial. A reminder that even the strongest can fall and that vigilance is eternal. That the moment you think you are safe is the moment you are most in danger. Take that message back and make them understand. And if they do not listen, Zaxthor asked, if they continue down this path, then we will do what we promised, Jake said. We will return and not to conquer and not to destroy, but to contain. We will lock your galaxy away and isolate it from the wider universe and let you do whatever you are going to do within your own space. We will not let your darkness spread, and that is our red line. Cross it and we will show you what we are truly capable of, and not as a threat, but as a promise. The journey back took 3 years, and when they finally reached council space, everything had changed. The militants had gained more power and the research facilities had expanded. 2 more species had vanished mysteriously, though the council claimed they had simply cut off communications. The galaxy was fracturing, with some species pushing for expansion and conquest, while others tried desperately to hold to the old principles. Zaxthor called for an emergency session and presented the data crystal. The council gathered and filled the chamber with every species represented. The empty seat sat in its place, watching silently. Zaxthor loaded the crystal into the main display. Before you continue down this path, he said, you need to see this. You need to understand what humanity really is and what they survived and what they are trying to prevent. The crystal activated and images filled the chamber showing another galaxy similar to their own. But it was wrong and twisted and dead. The images showed world after world, all lifeless and all bearing scars of weapons beyond imagining. There were humans, but they were different and harder and colder. A humanity that had let itself become monstrous. The recording explained what had happened and how humanity had reached the stars and found themselves alone in their galaxy. How they had expanded without check and fractured into competing factions. How those factions had gone to war, and how that war escalated until it consumed everything. They had destroyed their own galaxy in the name of victory, until only a few ships remained fleeing into the void, carrying the last humans who remembered what they had been before the darkness.